They used to call him a rancher. Now, they called him a ghost. Jack Turner had lost it all, his land, his cattle, even the pride that once kept him standing tall. But when a letter arrived with news of an inheritance, a rotting orchard in Idaho and a name from the past he'd long forgotten, Jack had no idea that what waited for him wasn't just broken land. It was a secret buried deep in the soil, a secret powerful men would kill to protect. The November wind cut through the valley like a knife, rattling the tin roof of the wagon Jack called home. Once, he had owned acres of open range in Montana, with cattle spread as far as the eye could see. Once, his name had meant something. But pride doesn't pay doctor's bills, and the accident that nearly took his wife's life had stripped him down to nothing. He sat at the rickety table, staring at a chipped tin cup filled with coffee so bitter it could strip paint. His hands were calloused, rough, but now they held nothing but defeat. The fire in his chest, the one that had carried him through droughts, stampedes, and long winters, had gone out. A sharp knock at the door startled him. Nobody came out this far unless they had a reason. Jack opened it to find a delivery rider, dust on his boots and a yellowed envelope in his hand. "Jacob Turner?" the rider asked. Jack hadn't heard that name in years. Only one man ever called him Jacob. The envelope was heavy, sealed with a red wax stamp. The handwriting was shaky, old-fashioned, Henry Whitfield. His uncle. A man Jack had met only a handful of times, always a shadow at family gatherings, always apart. Strange, they used to call him. Half wild, half mad, living alone in Idaho with nothing but trees for company. Jack broke the seal with a thumb, his pulse slow but steady. Inside was a short letter, the words neat but final: Uncle Henry was dead. And with his passing came an inheritance, 100 acres of apple orchard in Snake River Valley, and something else Jack hadn't expected. A companion. Not a horse, not cattle. No, the letter was clear: she has been here longer than most, and she knows the land. Trust her when you cannot trust yourself. Jack let out a dry laugh, though it tasted like ash. An orchard? He knew cattle, not apples. And a woman, an Apache woman, no less, left behind like some kind of caretaker. The whole thing felt like one last joke life had decided to play on him. But as the wind clawed through the cracks of his wagon and the silence pressed heavier on his chest, Jack realized something he hadn't felt in months. He had nowhere else to go. No more debts to pay, no cattle to herd, no land to lose. The orchard might be worthless, but at least it was a direction. The next morning, he packed what little he had into the back of his battered wagon and set off down the long road west. His old horse pulled slow, hooves striking dust, the mountains rising ahead like ancient sentinels. By the time he reached Snake River Valley, the sun had begun to bleed into the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. The orchard lay before him, crooked trees blackened and bent, the ground littered with fruit turned to rot. And there, at the far edge of the orchard, stood a figure wrapped in a shawl. Dark hair streaked with silver, her stance tall and unyielding. She did not wave. She did not move. She only watched him with eyes that seemed to see straight through the dust and failure clinging to him. Jack gripped the reins tighter, his throat dry. So this was what Henry had left him, an orchard that smelled of death, and a woman who looked like she belonged to the land itself. For the first time in months, Jack felt the weight of something stir in his chest. Not hope. Not yet. But something that would not let him turn back. The wagon wheels groaned as Jack pulled up the narrow dirt road that led into the orchard. The land smelled of rot, a sour-sweet stench clinging to the evening air. The apple trees stood twisted, their branches like blackened claws scraping at the fading sky. It didn't look like an orchard at all. It looked like a graveyard. Jack reined his horse to a stop. For a long moment he just sat there, staring at the ruin Henry had left behind. The place felt haunted, like the trees were whispering secrets only the wind could understand. He'd known hardship before. Drought, disease, winters so cold the cattle froze standing. But this was different. This was decay, years of it, heavy and unmoving. And then he saw her. At the far edge of the orchard, half shadowed by the crooked trees, stood the woman from the night before. She hadn't moved from where he'd first seen her. A tall figure wrapped in a faded shawl, her black hair streaked with silver, her posture straight as a rifle barrel. She was waiting. Jack climbed down from the wagon, boots sinking into damp earth. The smell of rot clung to him, thick as smoke. He pulled his coat tighter against the chill and walked toward her. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. "You must be Taya," Jack said, his voice rough. The woman inclined her head slightly, her dark eyes steady. "Henry told me you'd come." Her words struck him harder than he expected. "Did he now?" Jack asked, forcing a dry laugh. "He forgot to mention he was leaving me a ruin." Taya's gaze swept across the orchard, the crooked trees, the sagging fence. "Ruins carry truth," she said simply. "Most men just don't care to listen." Jack bristled. He'd had his fill of riddles and half-truths. He wanted something solid, something he could hang his hat on. "All I see is dead trees and a house that won't stand through another winter." Taya stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as if she were studying him the way one studies a map. "That's all you want to see?" Henry knew better. Her calm unsettled him. There was no plea in her voice, no apology for trespass. She spoke as if the orchard belonged to her as much as to Henry, maybe more. Jack shook his head and turned toward the cabin. The porch sagged under his boots, boards groaning like old bones. He pushed open the door, the stale air of dust and mildew rushing out to greet him. Inside, the house was little more than memory, faded furniture, a rusted stove, walls stained with time. He set his bag down by the door. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the wind pushing through the cracks. When he turned, Taya was standing in the doorway, her shawl catching the dim light. "Henry trusted me," she said. "He told me to stay. To wait. For you." Jack let out a bitter breath. "Why me? I'm no savior. I'm just a man who ran out of places to go." Taya's expression didn't change. She walked past him, her hand brushing along the table scarred with old knife marks. "Sometimes it's not about choosing. Sometimes the land chooses you." Jack watched her, the weight of her words hanging heavier than the silence. Outside, the orchard groaned under the wind, branches scraping like restless spirits. For the first time, Jack felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold. Something about this woman, about this place, gnawed at the edges of his doubt. He wanted to dismiss it all as madness, but a whisper in his gut told him Henry had left him more than dead trees. As the night deepened, the valley seemed to close in around him. And somewhere beyond the rotting orchard, in the shadows Jack could not yet see, the past waited, restless, buried, and far from done with him. The night stretched long and heavy, the wind scraping the orchard branches against the cabin walls like skeletal fingers. Jack Turner sat alone at Henry's old table, the kerosene lamp throwing weak light across the warped wood. Dust clung to everything, jars cloudy with age, shelves lined with nothing but cobwebs. It was a house full of silence, the kind that pressed on a man until he could hear his own doubts louder than the storm outside. Jack leaned back, rubbing his temples. Taya had gone without a word, disappearing into the orchard as if the shadows belonged to her. She unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She carried herself with a calm that felt older than the land itself, and her words, "The land chooses you," still echoed in his head. Restless, Jack opened a drawer in the table. It stuck halfway, swollen from years of damp. With a sharp tug, it gave way, sending dust into the air. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with cracked leather. His uncle's handwriting scrawled across the first page, dated April, 1881. Jack frowned, the words neat but uneven. Government men came again. Promises of cures. Promises of power. They walk the rows at night, thinking I don't see. He turned another page. Samples taken. Apples cut and carried off. They said the orchard would be blessed. But the trees are sick now. Sick, and so is the land. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. Mad ramblings, he told himself. Henry had always been the odd one, the recluse no one spoke kindly of. But there was something about the ink, the deliberate hand, the way some lines were underlined so hard the paper tore. This wasn't just talk from a lonely old man. One line caught him cold. If anyone finds this, trust Taya. She remembers. The kerosene lamp flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. Jack set the pages down, his hands tightening on the table edge. His uncle had written her name, years before. Not the horse, not the orchard, not the land. A woman. The same woman who now lingered in the trees, silent as a watchman. A soft knock at the door startled him. Jack rose, rifle in hand, his boots creaking across the floor. He opened it slow. Taya stood there, her shawl pulled tight against the cold, her face unreadable. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes finding the journal on the table. "You found it," she said quietly. Jack's jaw tightened. "What is this, Taya? Why was Henry writing about government men and sick trees? What does any of this mean?" She placed her hand on the brittle pages, her fingers steady. "It means he wasn't crazy. It means the orchard holds more than you want to believe." Jack scoffed. "All I see is rot. Dead fruit and wasted years." Her gaze lifted, piercing and sharp. "Then you're not looking hard enough." Silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Outside, the orchard groaned under the weight of the wind, branches scraping like whispers. Jack wanted to dismiss it all, to toss the journal into the fire and be done with it. But the way Taya stood there, calm, certain, as though she had been waiting her whole life for him to read those words, chilled him more than the night air ever could. He sat back down, staring at Henry's scrawled ink. For the first time since stepping foot in Snake River Valley, Jack Turner felt it, the weight of something buried, restless, and not about to let him walk away. The morning broke cold, with frost clinging to the orchard like a white shroud. Jack Turner stepped onto the porch, Henry's journal still heavy in his hand. The words from the night before haunted him: government men, stolen samples, a warning scrawled across the page, trust Taya. She remembers. And there she was. Taya stood near the fence line, her shawl pulled against the chill, her breath visible in the pale light. She wasn't watching the house. She was watching the orchard, as though the trees themselves were speaking to her. Jack muttered under his breath. Strangest inheritance a man ever got. He walked toward her, boots crunching on the frozen ground. Without turning, she said, "You read his words." "I did." Jack's voice was low, edged with doubt. "Doesn't mean I believe him." Finally, she looked at him. Her dark eyes were steady, carrying a weight that unsettled him. "Belief isn't needed. Seeing is." Before he could ask what she meant, she moved, her steps sure and deliberate, weaving through the crooked trees. Jack followed, his breath clouding in the morning air, the journal tucked under his arm. The orchard was quieter than it had any right to be, the only sounds their boots against the earth and the groan of branches above. They stopped before an old apple tree, its trunk massive and scarred. The bark was twisted, but the roots spread wide, anchoring deep into the soil. Taya crouched, brushing away frost and dead leaves. "Here," she whispered. Jack frowned. "What am I looking at? Dirt?" Her fingers dug into the earth, and soon the soil crumbled away to reveal ground that had been disturbed, too soft, too loose compared to the hardened earth around it. She looked up at him. "Henry showed me this tree once. He said it remembered." Jack let out a humorless laugh. "Trees don't remember, Taya." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then dig." Jack hesitated, but something in her tone pushed him forward. He dropped to his knees, using his hands at first, then his knife to cut through the damp soil. The smell of rot and earth filled his nose. After several minutes, his fingers struck something solid, wood. He scraped harder until the outline of a small box appeared, edges darkened by time. His breath caught. He pulled it free, dirt falling away in clumps. The hinges were rusted, the lid sealed tight. With effort, he pried it open. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. His hands shook as he unfolded it. Photographs, grainy black and white, slipped into his lap. Men in suits stood among the orchard rows, their faces turned from the camera. Trucks with open doors, crates being loaded under the cover of night. And papers. Pages of reports filled with diagrams and chemical notes Jack couldn't make sense of. But the signatures at the bottom, government officials, scientists, were clear enough. Taya's voice broke the silence. Now you see. Jack stared at the evidence, the truth pressing down like a weight he wasn't ready to carry. His throat tightened. Why the hell would Henry keep this buried? Taya straightened, her face calm but hard. Because the land remembers. And because men forget. Jack swallowed, anger rising with confusion. This wasn't just a ruined orchard. This was something darker, something worth hiding. He shoved the papers back into the box and stood, his hands dirty, his chest tight. Whatever this is, he muttered, it's bigger than me. Taya's eyes locked onto his. That's why Henry left it for you. Not because you wanted it. Because you were the one who couldn't walk away. The wind swept through the orchard then, rattling the branches like bones. Jack held the box close, the weight of it more than wood and paper. He had come to Snake River Valley with nothing left. But now, standing beneath that scarred apple tree, he realized he had inherited more than rot. He had inherited a secret. One that would not let him turn back. The sun had climbed just high enough to burn the frost off the orchard when Jack Turner heard it, the low growl of wagon wheels crunching along the dirt road. He stepped out onto the porch, the wooden box still heavy under his arm, his eyes narrowing against the glare. A black carriage rolled to a stop by the sagging fence, its wheels too clean, its paint too polished for this forgotten valley. 3 men climbed down. They wore long coats, dark and sharp, their boots too fine for country dust. One adjusted his tie, another struck a match to light a cigarette, the third simply stood with his hands folded behind his back, face unreadable. Jack felt a prickle run down his neck. These weren't neighbors. These weren't men who came to buy apples. The tallest one tipped his hat with a smile that carried no warmth. "Mr. Turner," he called, his voice smooth as oil, "we'd like a word." Jack didn't answer. He moved to the edge of the porch, arms crossed, his stance wide. Taya appeared from between the trees then, silent as ever, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes fixed on the strangers. She didn't need to speak, the tension in her gaze was warning enough. The man continued, unbothered. "We represent parties interested in this land. I imagine you've noticed it's not worth much in its current state. We'd be glad to take it off your hands. Relieve you of the burden." Jack's jaw tightened. He thought of the box, the photographs, Henry's words scrawled in desperation. He thought of the men in those old pictures, moving crates in the dark. Looking at the strangers now, the faces might have changed, but the shadows were the same. "It's not for sale," Jack said flatly. The man's smile thinned, though it didn't leave his lips. "You might reconsider. Land like this can be costly to maintain. Taxes. Weather. Accidents. Sometimes it's easier to let go before it swallows you." Jack stepped down from the porch, closing the distance until he stood at the fence line. Taya moved with him, silent, steady, her presence like stone at his side. Jack's voice carried steel this time. "I said no." The cigarette smoker flicked ash onto the ground, his eyes cold. The third man finally spoke, his tone low and edged. Think carefully, Mr. Turner. Some inheritances are more trouble than they're worth. The words hung in the air like the click of a cocked hammer. For a long moment, no one moved. The orchard groaned under the wind, branches swaying like old witnesses. Finally, the tall man tipped his hat again, his smile back in place though his eyes stayed hard. "We'll be in touch." He gave a signal, and the three climbed back into the carriage. The wheels crunched over gravel as it rolled away, the black paint catching sunlight until the bend in the road swallowed them whole. Jack stood at the fence, fists clenched, watching the dust settle. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the heavy certainty that Henry's warnings had been true. Beside him, Taya broke the silence. "They've come before. They'll come again." Jack turned to her, his chest tight. "What do they want?" Her eyes lingered on the orchard, on the scarred trees swaying in the wind. "Not the land. Not the apples. They want the silence. And they'll pay anything, or take everything, to keep it." Jack swallowed hard, the box still under his arm. The orchard was no longer just his burden. It was a battlefield, and the fight had already found him. The valley went quiet before the first drop of rain fell. Jack Turner had lived long enough under open skies to know when weather carried more than just clouds. This silence wasn't natural, it pressed heavy, the kind that makes the hair on a man's arm stand on end. By late afternoon, the horizon was a bruise of purple and black, swelling with thunder. Jack stepped onto the porch, his jaw tight. The orchard swayed in uneasy rhythm, branches creaking like old bones. Taya stood near the fence, her shawl whipping in the wind, her dark eyes scanning the sky. "It's coming hard," she said. Jack nodded, though he kept his gaze on the trees. He couldn't shake the faces of those men who'd stood here hours ago with polished boots and empty smiles. Storm or no storm, he knew trouble carried their scent. The first crack of lightning split the sky, blinding for a moment. Then came the rain, sheets of it, pounding the roof, turning the earth into mud. The cabin shuddered under the force. Jack ran into the yard, boots sinking, to check the barn. The old beams held, but barely. "Jack!" Taya's voice cut through the storm. She was standing deep in the orchard, her shawl plastered to her shoulders, hair whipping wild. She was pointing, urgent. "Over here." Jack slogged through the mud toward her, water stinging his face. His chest burned with every breath. Taya stood beside one of the oldest apple trees, its trunk massive, roots thick as a man's arm. Lightning struck again, and the tree groaned, splitting with a sound like a rifle shot. The ground shook as it toppled, roots tearing free, soil exploding into the air. Jack stumbled back, heart hammering. In the hole left behind, something glinted beneath the churned mud, metal. Taya dropped to her knees, clawing at the earth with her bare hands. "Help me," she shouted. Jack threw himself beside her, mud sucking at his fingers. Together they dragged a heavy chest free, the steel side slick with rain. Jack grunted, pulling it onto firmer ground. The lock was rusted, corroded by decades. With a rock, he slammed until the latch broke, the lid springing open. Inside, preserved beneath wax and cloth, lay rows of vials and jars, samples of fruit, soil, and leaves, each labeled in Henry's careful script. Beneath them, thick folders of reports, stamped with government seals. Jack's breath caught. This is what they were after," he whispered. Taya's face was pale in the stormlight, but her voice carried steel. "This is why Henry guarded the orchard. Why he told me to wait for you. It isn't just land, Jack, it's proof." Thunder roared above them, shaking the ground. Jack looked down at the case, his hands trembling. The orchard wasn't a ruin. It was a grave, hiding evidence powerful enough to ruin men who thought themselves untouchable. He met Taya's gaze, rain running down both their faces. For the first time since stepping into Snake River Valley, Jack felt something stronger than fear. Responsibility. He closed the chest, hefted it onto his shoulder, and shouted above the wind, "Then let's get it inside before the whole damn valley comes down on us." They staggered back toward the cabin, the storm raging around them. Behind them, the orchard bent low but did not break, its roots deeper than any storm could reach. And in the heart of that storm, Jack knew the fight had only just begun. The storm broke by morning, leaving the valley drenched and raw. Mud sucked at Jack Turner's boots as he stepped outside, the steel chest tucked safely inside the cabin. The orchard looked beaten half to death, branches torn, fruit scattered like bones. Yet in the broken soil, new shoots pushed through, green, alive, defiant. Jack wiped the rain from his brow. He should have felt relief at finding Henry's proof, but the weight in his chest only grew heavier. Evidence that Strong didn't stay hidden forever. Men like the ones who'd stood at his gate didn't walk away empty-handed. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared to a copper-red glow. The air was too still, the kind of stillness that makes a man's gut twist. Jack spotted dust rising from the ridge road. His hand went instinctively to the rifle propped by the door. 3 riders appeared against the horizon, their silhouettes cut sharp in the setting sun. They rode with purpose, not like neighbors passing through, but like men who knew exactly where they were headed. Taya stepped out of the orchard, shawl draped across her shoulders, her eyes locked on the riders. She said nothing, but Jack didn't need words. He could feel her warning in the way her hand tightened around the wooden rail. The men reined up at the fence. Dust settled around them, the horses restless, snorting. The leader was the same tall man from the carriage, clean coat, polished boots, hat tipped just enough to show his eyes. The smile he gave Jack was thin as a razor. "Evening, Mr. Turner," he drawled. "Storm didn't treat your orchard kindly." Jack rested the rifle against his shoulder. "It's weathered worse." The man's eyes flicked to Taya, then back to Jack. "We told you yesterday, we represent parties interested in this land. Seems you've been busy. Digging, perhaps?" Jack felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "This land isn't for sale. Not yesterday. Not today. Not ever." The leader leaned on his saddle horn, the smile never touching his eyes. "Careful words, friend. Some inheritances cost more than they give." The second rider shifted, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. The third spat into the dirt, silent, watchful. Jack kept his stance steady, but his pulse hammered in his throat. Taya stepped forward then, her voice low but cutting through the stillness. "Henry told me men like you would come back. He said the land remembers what you tried to bury." The leader's smile faltered, just for a second, before he tipped his hat. "Ashamed to see good folks poisoned by old stories." His tone hardened. "Think this over, Mr. Turner. You've got until our return." With that, he yanked his reins, turning his horse. The other 2 followed, hooves thundering against the dry ground as they rode back into the fading light. Jack watched them vanish, his fists clenched around the rifle. The silence they left behind was worse than their presence, like a noose waiting to tighten. Beside him, Taya's voice was steady. "They know. And they won't stop." Jack looked at the orchard, the chest hidden inside the cabin, the valley that now felt more like a trap than a home. His voice was grim, certain. "Then it's war." Night fell heavy over Snake River Valley. Jack Turner sat at Henry's table, the steel chest open before him, lamplight spilling across vials and papers that smelled faintly of earth and chemicals. The evidence stared back at him like a jury, silent, damning, undeniable. Outside, the orchard creaked in the wind. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes. Jack knew those riders weren't bluffing. Men that smooth, that polished, they didn't come twice unless they meant to finish the job. Taya stood by the window, her figure framed in the pale moonlight. She hadn't spoken in a while, just watched the darkness as though she expected it to move. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "They will return. Henry said the orchard would demand blood before it gave peace. Jack rubbed his hands across his face, weariness cutting deep. I'm one man, Taya. I can mend a fence, work a herd, shoot straight when I have to. But this, he gestured to the box, this is bigger than me. Bigger than ranches and debts. Her eyes didn't leave the window. Then call someone who can carry it with you. The words hit harder than she knew. Jack hadn't picked up a phone in years. Family ties had snapped clean after his father's funeral, pride and bitterness cutting deeper than distance. But now, with the storm still echoing in his bones and the threat of riders heavy on the air, he knew she was right. The old rotary phone sat on the shelf, gathering dust. Jack stared at it a long time before finally spinning the dial, each click loud in the silence. His gut clenched when the line came alive. Hello. The voice on the other end was brisk, clipped with the rhythm of city living. Jack swallowed. Megan. It's Jack. There was a pause. Years of silence stretched across the wire. Jack Turner, she said slowly. Well, hell. That's a surprise. I wouldn't be calling unless it mattered. His voice cracked rough. He glanced at the chest, Henry's handwriting scrawled across the labels. I found something. Something worth more than land, more than cattle. And it's got men circling this place like vultures. Her tone sharpened. Are you in trouble? Jack exhaled. The kind you don't walk away from alone. The silence on the line dragged until Jack thought she'd hung up. Finally, Megan said, do you still have it? Whatever Henry left. Every page, Jack answered. Good, she said quickly. Don't move it. Don't hide it anywhere new. Just keep it safe. I'm coming. Before he could argue, the line went dead. Jack set the receiver down, staring at the silence it left behind. His chest tightened with a mix of dread and relief. He had just opened the door to a fight that stretched beyond the valley. Taya turned from the window, her eyes unreadable. Who did you call? My cousin, Jack muttered. She's a journalist now. The kind that digs for truth. Taya nodded once, slow and certain. Then you've done what Henry could not. You've given the orchard a voice. Jack leaned back, his hands gripping the chair arms. He wasn't sure if he'd just saved himself, or doomed them all. By the next afternoon, the valley carried a nervous stillness. Jack Turner sat on the porch steps, his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dirt road that wound down from the ridge. Every sound, the groan of branches, the caw of a crow, set his nerves on edge. Taya stood nearby, silent as a shadow, her shawl pulled close. She hadn't asked questions about the call Jack made the night before. She didn't need to. Her eyes carried the same steady weight Henry's journal had, a knowledge that the land remembers, even when men want to forget. When the rattle of an engine broke the quiet, Jack rose. A dusty sedan crawled up the road, wheels crunching on gravel, out of place in this weathered valley. The car rolled to a stop by the sagging fence, and from it stepped a woman in a long coat, her hair pulled back, her stride brisk. Megan, Jack muttered under his breath. She shut the car door, straightening with the poise of someone used to fighting battles in boardrooms and press rooms, not orchards. Yet when her eyes found Jack, there was the flicker of memory, cousins who once rode together in summers long past. Jack, she said simply. Megan. He nodded. The years between them weighed heavy, but the moment didn't allow for grudges. Taya's gaze lingered on the newcomer, but she said nothing. Megan stepped to the porch, her eyes catching on the rifle in Jack's hands, then on the orchard stretching behind him like a graveyard of secrets. Show me, she said. Inside, the steel chest lay open on Henry's scarred table. Vials lined the box, pages scattered across the wood, each marked with Henry's careful script. Megan's breath caught as she sifted through them. She adjusted her glasses, scanning signatures, government seals, reports written in a language only insiders knew. "This is real," she whispered. "Not just ramblings. Not just stories." Her eyes flashed. "Jack, this is enough to blow a hole straight through every lie they built on this land." Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I told you I wasn't crazy." "You're not," she said, her voice firm. Then softer, "but you're in danger. You both are." She looked at Taya, as if recognizing her role without words. Taya finally spoke, her tone calm but steady. "Danger has lived here longer than either of us. The land holds it still." Megan frowned but didn't argue. She turned back to Jack. "We can't keep this hidden. We need to move fast, lawyers, reporters I trust. This kind of evidence doesn't survive in shadows." Jack's jaw tightened. "And if those men ride back before you're done?" Megan met his eyes, unflinching. "Then we stand our ground. You've got the truth. That's stronger than bullets." Outside, the orchard moaned under a sudden gust of wind. Jack glanced through the window and froze. Far down the ridge road, black shapes lingered, wagons or riders, too far to count. Watching. Waiting. His grip tightened on the rifle. "They're already here." Taya stepped forward, her voice like flint striking steel. "Then let the reckoning come. The land is ready." Jack swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he believed her. But when he looked at Megan, fire already burning in her eyes, and at Taya, rooted as firmly as the old apple trees, he felt something stir deep inside him. Not fear. Not yet. But the certainty that whatever storm was coming, it would break here, in Snake River Valley. Dusk fell hard over Snake River Valley, the sky painted in streaks of blood red and coal black. Jack Turner stood on the porch with his rifle in hand, his eyes fixed on the ridge where riders gathered like storm clouds ready to break. The orchard behind him whispered in the wind, its twisted branches restless. Inside, Megan stacked Henry's papers into neat bundles, her jaw tight with determination. "Once this leaves the valley, it's no longer just your fight, Jack. It's a story the world can't bury." Taya stood at the doorway, her shawl catching the last light. Her voice was low but steady. "The land has carried this truth long enough. Tonight, it passes to you." The thunder of hooves broke the silence. Out of the dim light came half a dozen riders, black coats gleaming, pistols glinting at their sides. At their head rode the tall man, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Turner," he called, reining in at the fence. "Last chance. Hand it over, and you walk away." Jack raised his rifle, calm and steady. "Not this time." The leader's smile faded. He nodded once, and the riders spread out like wolves circling a wounded elk. The orchard groaned in the wind, branches scraping as if the land itself braced for blood. Then came the crack of gunfire. Jack fired first, his shot tearing through the silence. Wood splintered, dirt flew, horses reared. Megan dove behind the table, clutching the papers to her chest. Taya moved with uncanny calm, pulling Jack low just as a bullet whistled past his ear. The fight was fast, brutal. Smoke filled the air, thunder rolling not from the sky but from rifles. Jack's shoulder burned from recoil, his throat raw from shouting. He wasn't just defending land, he was defending Henry's truth, Taya's trust, Megan's future. At last, silence fell, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The tall man lay in the dirt, his hat gone, his smile erased. His eyes locked on Jack, bitter, beaten. "You think the truth saves you," he spat. "Truth ruins men." Jack lowered his rifle, his voice steady. "Maybe it ruins the wrong ones." By dawn, the riders were gone, some carried off, some limping into the hills. Megan's car was loaded with the chest, the papers, the vials. She pressed Jack's hand firmly before leaving. "This isn't over, but the world will hear Henry's story now. Taya remained by the orchard, her face calm as sunrise. She placed a hand on one of the scarred trees. "The land breathes easier," she said. "It remembers peace, too." Jack looked out across the valley, where broken trees still stood tall against the wind. For the first time in years, he felt weight lift from his chest. Not victory, not fortune, just the steady pulse of something that mattered. He tipped his hat, the dawn painting the orchard gold. "Sometimes you've got to lose everything," he murmured, "to finally stand for something." If you were Jack Turner, standing alone in that orchard, rifle in hand, knowing powerful men wanted you silenced, would you fight to protect the truth, or walk away to save your own life?